to the other eye socket. So I can't emphasize enough those little tips in terms of drawing. Up above the eye, there should be an angle or an angularity above the eye in through here. We call this the eye cover fold. And then on the surface of the eye itself, it's generally sort of rounded. So we look for a rounded quality and then an angular quality above. Some people have a double sort of fold above their eye, which you also want to go for because it adds a lot of character. And we learned from Rodin, somebody was talking to him about ugliness, and he said the only thing that's ugly is that which lacks character. And that's one thing that gesture gives you, is a lot of character in the pose. I think if you get strong gestures, you're well on your way to long pose excellence. And if you get really weak gestures, because you're slowing down too much and not capturing the vitality and channeling it into the paper, then the long pose is never really going to work out too well because the gesture is going to be dead. One thing about the shadow of the nose onto the face is the farther you get into the drawing, we have this happen a lot in long pose, you don't want to confuse the viewer as to what part is actually nose and what part is cast shadow. So I'm going to break the shadow right around the nostril and through here to try to suggest how much smaller the nose might be. Because if your eye reads this shape as all nose, it's just going to look too big. So I'm trying to use the shapes here almost like a painter and interpret them. Also related to painting is the idea, again, of leaving space in the lines in order to let the head sort of develop more organically, so I don't tighten it up too soon. We find in portrait drawing that the nose actually goes really high up into the eye socket. And typically we make the nose too small. We make it end too low. And the more I work on her mouth, the more I'm going to try to triangulate her mouth. And we use a lot of triangles in figure drawing. As opposed to 2-point seeing, we try to use a lot of 3-point seeing.
You mean like 3-point perspective?
No, I mean like taking 3 points and trying to gauge the space between the 3 points that you're looking at. We call it triangulation because it's a slightly different thing than gauging a head length. You know, you look at a head length is basically a 2-point relationship because it's the top of a head and the bottom of a head. You repeat that distance over the course of the figure, right? But if you're looking at 3-point relationships, it might be something like the top, the bottom, and the left, and your eye just goes back and forth between these, and that's what we call triangulation. If you develop a priority, then your eye can say the right side, the left side, the top and the bottom, those are priorities. And when I add other points, like this kind of a point through here, and I'm jumping, then I can base my assessment of the other points on the largest, most important ones in the head or in the figure. On break, we were talking about John H. Vanderpool's book, The Human Figure, and I can't recommend it highly enough. If you can do some reading in addition to drawing, it's always a good thing because it gives you a sense of what to expect in the figure and in the head. And in this case, I'm going to recommend that because it teaches you how to see the planes of the head. The planes of the head are very important. Without the planes of the head, you sometimes get confused as to what's going on. Yeah, it's called The Human Figure. It's by John H. Vanderpool, published in 1907. Vanderpool, Vanderpoel. Yeah, sure. He was
Is John J-O-N or J-O-H-N?
J-O-H-N, yeah. He was one of the founders of the Art Institute of Chicago. He was sent to Paris to draw at the Académie Julienne, and he was one of only 3 American students to have his work on permanent display at the Académie Julienne. He came back and he helped to construct the light drawing class. Wrote his book in 1907, and in 1911 he was offered a head drawing instructor at the Royal Academy in London, which he turned down, and then he passed away of a heart attack in 1911, so he died pretty quickly, pretty young. And his book is a tour de force on the use of planes, and I think a really valuable piece of historical knowledge on the teaching of the French Academy, which produced some of the greatest artists of the last century, so, or I guess of the century before last, right? 19th century. So, do you have any questions?
Yeah, could you go over the anti-helix of the breakout? It's kind of hard to see the demonstration.
Yeah, sure. So that's basically an ear, like a letter D, right? And so you know when you're using that letter D, that this is a really particularly important piece of the head right in through there. Usually people don't draw this the right way because they're kind of caught up in the details, but it's kind of the side of the head right in through there, and it marks a plane that we call the masseter plane, like the chewing muscle is right in through there. So you want to look for this and try to think about the other side of the head because it's part of that critical pyramid. So the helix is really the largest part in a way of the ear, and it's this surrounding part in through here. All of this is helix. It basically starts around here and it travels up and then it turns all the way around. You can tell a good helix because it turns this way. And when we learn to draw ears as kids, we kind of draw them like that. But you'll see in a book by Stephen Rogers Peck, I forget the name of it, he likens it to a question mark. He uses these things called form, or I don't know, they're like metaphors, form metaphors. So the helix is really far out in terms of depth here, and then it spirals around like my kneaded eraser. If I can stretch it out without it destroying itself. The ear is so much more about this than it is about that, because it really gives you a lot of space. My 2-year-old, her ears are basically out like this. They're awesome. So the helix, because this piece goes all the way in toward the head, this is why I think of it as being like a big coin, like a big quarter. And so if I take the edge of that quarter and I continue it, it feels like it relates to the cheekbone to me. So the whole thing kind of kind of feels like a top plane. That's why you get that shadow shape above it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, if you notice in a helix, like any distinctive good helix has some little flaws in it. There's actually a term for it, which I forget. But if you contrast that with the way they're often drawn like bad yard furniture. They kind of come across like a noodle. You know, like when you go and you're driving to your grandparents or something, and you see furniture on the side of the road in one of those things that sell statuary, and the ear on the statue is a copy of a copy of a copy. All the distinctiveness in the ear disappears in those statues. It looks like the brim of a bowl. So you think about this sitting like that. Okay, so that's the helix. The antihelix is a form that goes more toward the center of the head. It's this other form in through here.
And it tilts the other way.
It tilts the other way, yeah.
Oh.
And it splits into two pieces. The inside one here is really sharp generally, and the outside one is very soft. And the form itself generally is a bit smaller than the helix, and sometimes it sits a little bit in, but other times this is farther out than that piece is. There's a lot of variation in the figure. And then this inner side here, which is a wonderful little crossing between the helix and the antihelix, articulates what some people call the inner ear, which is often thought of as 1/3 of the total length of the ear and through there. So in this case, I was thinking about it going that way. So that's where I grab my nickel. In fact, I could grab 2 nickels. And I could articulate almost like a letter Y as it splits. And part of the antihelix heads toward this side, and part of it heads toward that side, up the temporal ridge of the head, and gives you this kind of glorious net, which knits the figure together, using the ear as a landmark. And then down and through here, there's another little piece called the tragus. And the tragus is the one part of the ear that belongs to the face. So the tragus often juts out right in through here. If you think about it, if you consider the head as though it's a block and then lay the block on its side. So here we've got the eyes, and then here's the mouth. Give you a smiley face through there. You travel along the side, and a lot of the ear sits up like a ramp because there's a bowl underneath the ear which pushes the ear up. That makes sense? So if you look at the back of somebody's head, there's this bowl shape, and what's a convex, ball-like bowl back in the back is concave from the front. So that's the bowl right there, which is pushing this panel like a door off the side of the head. And the one piece that stays anchored to the face is the tragus. And that's why in some sculpture texts they use the tragus as the major landmark. Absent the center line and the center line, the third most important point that they find is the tragus on the ear, which is a funny thing, very shocking thing.